Hey, in this video, we're going to go ahead and test out our database connection. So the first thing we need to do is start off by creating a new project. So I'll go to the File menu and I'll say New Dynamic Web Project. And the name that we'll give for this project, we'll call it Web Student Tracker. We'll keep all the other defaults for the project and we'll click on the Finish button. All right, great. So Eclipse is going to create a new project for us and it's going to appear right here in the top left hand. So we have this new project called Web Student Tracker, which is great. So it's just a shell of a project. There's not much there right now. We need to go ahead and add some new information to it. So the first thing I want to do is move into this web content directory, because our first order of business is to copy over the Jdbc jar file. So this Jdbc jar file from MySQL will allow us to connect to the database. And what I'll do is I'll actually move back to those starter files that we had earlier in that download. So remember we had our download. My stuff is in My Java Training. Here's the extracted folder here for JSP Servlet Jdbc source code. I'm going to move down to this folder here called Web Student Tracker Starter Files. And I'm going to move into the webinf directory and I'll move into the lib. And there should be a file in here called MySQL Connector Java version number .jar. So that's our Jdbc jar file. So I simply want to copy this file. So I'll do a right click and I'll choose copy. Okay, great. So I have this file copied. Now let me move back over to Eclipse. Let's click on the webinf lib directory in my project, and then I'll click paste. So again, inside of Eclipse, webinf lib, click on paste. And this should paste this new jar file here. So expand the folder and there it is. Cool. So our new jar file is part of our project now. So this is great. All right. So now that I have the jar file over here, now what I want to do is copy over the connection pool configs. So I'll move back to my starter files again, and I'll move into this directory here called metainf context.xml. So this context.xml, again, remember it has our connection pool configuration information. So I'll go ahead and select this file. Again, do a right click. We'll choose copy. And then once again, I'll move back over to Eclipse. I'll move into the web content metainf directory in my project. I'll right click and I'll choose paste. Okay, awesome. So that's our context.xml file. And so I'll just double click this file just as a quick refresher here. This has our database connection information. So it gives us the name, the driver class name, the URL, so on and so forth. So this is all set up and, things look okay so far. All right, so I'll go ahead and close this file. So now what I want to do is actually go ahead and get ready to write some code here. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a package. So I'm going to create a new package for my source code. So I'll move up to the Java Resources folder here and I'll expand it. And I'll select the source folder here and I'll just right click and I'll say new and I'll select new Java package. So new package. So this is a new package where we're going to place our source code. So the name for the package, I'll call it com.lovetocode.web.jdbc. So that's our package name. And once we're happy with that, we can go ahead and click on the Finish button. Okay, excellent. So we have this new package. Now what I want to do is create a new servlet. So this is a test servlet that we're going to create that's going to test our database connection. So I'll say new and I'll choose servlet. All right, so here's the servlet. So the actual class name I'll call it test servlet. Very simple, very straightforward. And once you're happy here, click the Finish button. Or actually, sorry, click the Next button. We'll accept the default URL mappings here. We'll click next one more time. And then on this dialog here, we can uncheck some items. So uncheck the constructor and uncheck do post. So your screen should look very similar to mine. So the one thing for inherited and the one thing for do get, and everything else is unchecked. And here you can go ahead and click on finish. All right, great. So now we have this very basic servlet that Eclipse created for us. So this is kind of our initial start, our initial layout. And what we'll do here is we will go ahead and add some code here to test out our database connection. So the first thing I need to do is I need to get a reference to the connection pool. So remember earlier I said that we can make use of a Java EE feature where the Java app server or Tomcat will actually inject the connection pool for us. And so I'll show you how to do this. So we make use of this special annotation here called @resource. So we're going to inject a resource and we specify the name. So here we give name of JDBC Web Student Tracker. And that's the same name we use in our context config file. And now I give a field here, or a data member. So I say private data source, and then I'll just call it data source. So that's the actual handle or reference to our connection pool. Now I'll go ahead and clean up some of the imports here, fix some of the errors. And so I'll import on Java X.annotation for resource. Select that option. And then I'll do a similar thing here for data source. And be careful with data source. Make sure you import javax.sql.datasource. There's a number of different ones out there. Make sure you get the right one. javax.sql.datasource. All right, great. Now this name here for the resource, this is the exact same name as defined in our context.xml. So JDBC/Web Student Tracker, the exact same name. You have to make sure these names match up for Tomcat to give you the correct connection pool. All right, so we have all the connection pool stuff set up. Let's go ahead and move into our do-get method, and let's get ready to write some real code. So give me some white space here to kind of stretch out a bit. And as you know, I always like to just start off with writing some comments as far as, what this code's going to actually do. So the first step is setting up the print writer. And then the second step is getting a connection to the database. And then we go through and we create a SQL statement. And then we go ahead and execute that SQL statement. And then finally, we process the result set. So that's kind of the big idea, the game plan for this do-get method. And then we'll cut the code and we'll write all the code from scratch on how this part works out. All right, so let's go ahead and dive into step one, setting up the print writer. So again, this print writer out is simply what we use to send data back to the browser. So I say response.getWriter. So that's my out object. And then I also, I need to fix up the imports here, java.io.printWriter. And then I'll also set the content type on this response. So set content type, and this will simply be text plain, because right now I'm not really doing any HTML stuff. I'm just keeping it simple for right now. All right, so step two is getting a connection to the database. So I'll set up some SQL objects here, and I'll set them to null, and then I'll actually get a connection. So I'll set up myCon equals null. I'll set up a myStatement, and I'll also set up a result set. But right now it's null. We haven't really assigned it to anything yet. We'll assign it in those following steps. And I'll go ahead and fix up the imports. And here I'll show you an Eclipse trick on fixing the imports. They have this feature called Organize Imports. So I can go to Source, and then I can choose Organize Imports. And basically Eclipse will go out and try and resolve all the imports for you. And they'll also ask you some questions. So for statement, I say java.sql.statement. For connection, java.sql.connection, and hit finish. And then Eclipse will actually fix all those imports for you. So now we're good to go. That's just a little Eclipse trick for you that you can use later on. All right. Now let's go ahead and put this code inside of a try-catch block. So try and then exception, and then I'll just say exception.printStackTrace. This is kind of just a real quick and dirty for right now. We'll get into all the fancy stuff in later videos, but for now, we just want to make sure that we can get a valid connection to a database. So here I set up mycon equals data source.get connection. So I'm basically getting a connection to the database, and I'm actually getting that connection from the connection pool. Remember, data source is the same thing as connection pool. I'll just set up a little SQL statement here. Select star from student. And I'll say my statement equals mycon.create statement. All right, so now let's go ahead and execute that query. So here I'll say my statement.execute query. I pass in the SQL. It'll return a result set, so I assign it to myRS. And remember, those variables were defined a little earlier in this code. Now I simply need to process the result set. So here I'll say while myrs.next. So while I have more rows to process, then I'll start peeling off or accessing some of that data. So I'll simply get the email address for the student. So I'll say myrs.getString email and assign it to a variable. All right. And then I simply say an out.println email. So this out.println will actually send the data back to the browser, not to the standard out, but actually back to the browser. So we'll see a very simple page in the browser that'll simply loop through each one of the emails and simply print them out. On line 55, where we say myrs.getString email, that's simply getting the email from that given column name. So that's the basic idea here for doing the database work. So we get the connection, we create a statement, we execute the SQL query, and then finally process the result set. So that's the real brains here of this servlet. Well, all right, so let's go ahead and test this thing out. So what I'll do over on the left-hand side is I'll kind of expand this window, select this test servlet, and then I'll do a right click, and I'll choose Run As, and I'll say Run on Server. And so it'll prompt us which server to run on. I'll choose the Tomcat 8. I'll say Always Use this server. I click Next, and then I can just hit Finish. And Tomcat will start up. And then once Tomcat's running, then it'll show you the output here. And wow, this looks pretty good. So these are the email addresses for the people or the students that we have in the database. So we're actually connecting to the database, doing a query, getting that result set, and displaying the results right here in the browser. Now, don't worry. This is kind of very crude, very ugly right now. We're simply validating that we can connect to the database. Later in the videos, we'll actually make this pretty. We'll make use of HTML tables. We'll put in cascading style sheets, and we'll just make it look lovely. So don't worry. So let's go ahead and switch over to our MySQL tool just to make sure that we're looking at the right data and stuff. So I'll open up MySQL Workbench, and I'll go ahead and connect using my root password. And here's my table student. And I just simply do a right click here on select rows. And then there we go. So we have these 5 students with their 5 email addresses. And those are actually the same email addresses that we saw in the browser. All right. So our test servlet, our Java servlet, is actually connecting to this MySQL database, grabbing the data, and then making it available. So this all looks really, really good. Good job so far.